Felen, Jimmy Felen, he won the cup with Aberdeen. Now it's a new season, and he's sitting bottom of the league. After 10 games last season, Aberdeen were sat tied at the top with 28 points and had genuine hopes of a title charge, considering they had drawn away at Celtic and beat Rangers at Pittodrie. They would beat Dundee 4-1 at home, which would keep them within touching distance of Celtic. That game against Dundee was on the 9th of November. They wouldn't win again until a trip to Dens Park in February, would end up finishing 5th, and despite a Scottish Cup victory, a start to the season that has seen their only domestic goals come against Greenock Morton has got fans worried. So, in this video, I'll be looking at Aberdeen's last 15 months and looking into what made the Dons had such a good start, only for it to go so wrong under Felen. It could be argued that Aberdeen's problems stem from the departure of Derek McInnes in March 2021. McInnes left after a poor start to 2021 saw them sat in 4th place, after about 8 years of consistently finishing in the top 3. This would be followed by Stephen Glass, whose only previous managerial experience was with Atlanta United's second team in the USL. This was obviously criticised by fans, who believed it had something to do with the fact that Atlanta United have a 10% stake in Aberdeen and a strategic alliance exists between the two clubs, whatever that means. This didn't go well, with Glass getting sacked the following February following a defeat to Motherwell in the Scottish Cup, with the Dons sitting 9th in the league. Jim Goodwin would be next in the dugout after a fairly impressive spell with St Mirren, where he managed to turn the Buddies into a solid mid-table side after keeping them up on the final game before COVID. He would join following Aberdeen paying the apparent release clause of £250,000, and in the remainder of the 2021-22 season, he took Aberdeen from 7th to 10th, which was their lowest league finish in 18 years. Big changes would come in the summer though, with 26 transfers being made. Goodwin would be sacked in January after a run of games saw them lose 5-0 to Hearts, 1-0 to 6th tier Darvel, and 6-0 to Hibs, with the club sat in 7th. The next man in the dugout, initially on an interim basis, would be Barry Robson. Robson would see an incredible end to the season that saw 8 wins in their last 10 before the split, followed by a win against St Mirren and a draw against Hibs that would see Aberdeen finish 3rd in the league and getting guaranteed Conference League football. The football gods were not happy with this, as despite getting a 2-year contract, Robson would be gone in January with the club sat in 8th and having been knocked out of Europe through the powers of bullshit. Seriously, that Pout game was the epitome of Robson's Aberdeen. Thankfully, he's doing pretty well at Rafe, so not complaining. The next man through the door would be Neil Warnock? Yes, the eccentric EFL man would get a shot at managing north of the border. He left after 2 wins in 8 matches, both coming in the cup, with one being against Bonnyrigg. Whilst Peter Leven finished out the season with the club finishing 9th, a new manager that many people hadn't heard of would be announced in April. Jimmy Felen is a Swedish manager who has been in coaching for a surprisingly long time. Felen started coaching at the age of 27 by becoming the head coach of SC Ljungbyholm, who had their first season as a club in the Swedish 8th tier, which they would win thanks to 17 wins out of a possible 18. After winning the 7th tier, Felen would join Jönköpings Södra IF as under-17s manager before working his way up through the youth ranks. He became first team manager in 2014 with the club in the 2nd tier after the players were not happy with the board's initial shortlist, leading to Jimmy being recommended by the squad. His first season would see the club finish 4th, which was the club's best finish since 1976, before winning the league to see the club return to the top flight for the first time since 1969. This achievement would get him snapped up by Elfsborg, where after a 12th place finish in his first season, they would finish 8th, 2nd, 4th, 6th and 2nd, but their European adventures would not see them reach any league or group stage. He would leave midway through the 2024 season to then take the Aberdeen job, and with him, Aberdeen would see a continental flair when it came to their arrivals. Aberdeen would sign Topi Keskinen, Christus Tobers, Alexander Jensen, Sivsha Heltner Nilsson, Peter Ambrose, no relation to Effie as far as I know, Gavin Malloy, Mats Noster, Dimitar Mitov, Antti Palaversa, Kevin Nisbet, Jeppe Ockels, Ode Daba and Alfie Dorrington to have a squad that fits Felin's style of play. As Aberdeen had failed to qualify for Europe, they came in at the League Cup group stage where they got off to a perfect start with a 3-0 win against Queen of the South, a 4-0 win at East Kilbride, a 2-1 win against Airdrie and a 6-0 win against Dumbarton. Of course, this was lower league opposition they were facing. Dumbarton would end up getting relegated from League 1 after financial issues came to a head. Queen of the South would fail to get promoted from League 1. Airdrie would be spared relegation following Aki's going into meltdown, even though Airdrie had 6 points by New Year. Don't ask about their only win at that point. And East Kilbride would go on to win the Lowland League. The opening day of the Premiership season would see them face St Johnstone, a side that many had predicted to get relegated, but still sterner opposition than League 1 quality sides. Aberdeen would score 3 times at McDermott Park, although one of them was an own goal, but they would still hold on for a 2-1 victory to start their league campaign. This was followed by a 3-1 win against St Mirren and a 2-0 win against Kilmarnock, both at home. A trip to Dingwall would see Kevin Nisbet score a 98th minute winner to see the Dons win 1-0, which was followed by a 2-1 win against Motherwell. They would win 2-1 against Dundee before their late antics would strike again with a 3-2 win against Hearts. This is all fine and dandy, but next up was their first real test, a trip to Celtic Park. With a potential 8 games against the Old Firm, it's imperative that games against either side see you lose as little points as possible, seeing as typically they very rarely drop points against the other sides. They would manage to come away from Glasgow with a point following a 2-0 draw, and this would put the hope into overdrive. Another win would come against Dundee United before their second big test, a midweek home game against Rangers. Nicky Devlin would give Aberdeen the lead before Bajrami would get an equaliser, but it would be Shayden Morris who would score the winner, leading to Aberdeen fans reaching a fever pitch. This was actually happening. Up next was a trip to Hampden for a League Cup semi-final against Celtic, and at this point they felt unstoppable. I wonder how that game went.
Whipped in, and the header! Cameron Carter, it goes for Celtic! Trying to burst past McKenzie, it's still Marina, and Tino for Kyogo! Marina! Takes over, Kuhn looks to slip that through to Dyson Marina! Kuhn, and still going on a touch of Kyogo, Kuhn, Marina! Trying to involve himself here, Engels. Kuhn now with the left foot, number 5! Oh, that's brilliantly done by Bernardo across from Johnson, a hat-trick for Dyson Marina!
What do you mean they lost 6-0? Yeah, this title challenging side was brought right back down to earth after being thumped at Hampden. It's fine though. Dundee would come to town and lose 4-1 before a trip to Paisley would see a 2-1 defeat, their first in the league. Fortunately, a trip to Easter Road would come next, where an out-of-sorts Hibs side was struggling at the bottom end of the table. Joel Newell would give Hibs the lead going into half-time, but Aberdeen would turn it around with goals from Jamie McGrath and Nicky Devlin. Nicky Cadden would score a stoppage time equaliser, but Estes Sockler would score what was surely the winner for Aberdeen in the 95th minute, a result that could potentially see them return to their pre-Hampden form. What do you mean Rocky Bashiri scored a minute later? This created a bit of a Freaky Friday situation where seemingly Hibs and Aberdeen decided to swap abilities. From this point on, Aberdeen would really struggle for form. The next win would be in mid-January, against Elgin. They would then get their next win at the beginning of February, against Dunfermline, but this did kickstart an improvement in form, with 4 wins and 3 draws in their next 9 games before the split. Just don't ask about that one loss. In the Cup, meanwhile, they managed to beat Queen's Park in the quarter-final 4-1 before managing to sneak past 9-man Hearts in the semi-final. Up next, however, was the final 5 games of the season. Aberdeen were sat in 5th, but only 3 points behind Hibs, and their first game would be against the Edinburgh side. An 80th minute goal from Kevin Nisbet would see Aberdeen get the win. Surely, this can kickstart a run in them that sees them climb back to 3rd. They lost 1-0 to St Mirren, 4-0 to Rangers, 5-1 to Celtic at home, and finally, a 2-1 defeat to Dundee United that saw them drop to 5th. Meaning they went from potential title challengers to potentially playing in the Conference League's second qualifying round. But there is still one game left, the Scottish Cup final. Unfortunately, it was against Celtic, a side that wins everything and so far this season have won 5-1 twice and 6-0 against Aberdeen this season. Enjoy your trip to Hampden, Aberdeen fans, but it will end in disappointment, especially after Celtic take the lead just before half-time.
Here's Morris, fires it in, and it's an equaliser!
Wait, Schmeichel, what have you done? You've just given them false hope. They're going to get their hearts horrendously broken now. Actually, Celtic aren't doing much, and it's gone to penalties. They can't, can they?
It's Aberdeen's cup! Dimitar Mitov!
Oh my god. They did it. They won the Scottish Cup. For the first time since 1990, they have lifted the trophy. Surely this will see a renewed confidence in the squad. Europa League playoffs also beckon, meaning guaranteed European League phase football, making recruitment easier. If Aberdeen can replicate their early season form, then they might just be able to hold out for a bit longer and potentially have another run at finishing at least third. Kenan Bilalovic would join von Barnamo, Nicolas Milanovic from Western Sydney Wanderers, Kevin Nisbet would sign permanently from Millwall, Emmanuel Gyamfi would join from Schalke, Marko Lazetic from AC Milan, Stuart Armstrong would return on a free, Jesper Karlsson would join on loan from Bologna along with Adil Aruchiche from Sunderland, and Alfie Dorrington would return on loan again. So with hope renewed and no League Cup group stage to deal with, their first game of the season would be away at Hearts, which saw a disaster class of finishing, seeing them lose 2-0 in Edinburgh. Next up was Celtic at home, where they would be thoroughly beaten 2-0, but there would be a break from the league action, as in the second round of the League Cup, they would beat Morton 3-0 at Capello. They would then face FCSB, who were a bit of a mess domestically, having lost to rivals Dinamo Bucharest thanks to a hat-trick from Danny Armstrong. A 2-2 draw at Pittodrie would be followed by a 3-0 defeat in Bucharest. Their next two games in the league, however, were against the newly promoted side, so surely this was a chance to finally get a win on the board. They would get beaten 1-0 at home by Falkirk, who were more than deserving winners, before drawing 0-0 against Livingston in yet another game where they seemed allergic to scoring goals. They would return to League Cup action at home to Motherwell, where they would lose 1-0, before an away trip to Dundee United saw them lose 2-0, and a trip to Motherwell saw them concede twice in added time, with no thanks to a mistake by Mitov, to again lose 2-0. So what has been Aberdeen's problem? Last season it seemed as if they just got found out and Felen didn't change the system. This season, however, it's glaringly obvious. They cannot score a goal to save their life. It's time to delve into the wonderful world of expected goal stats, or XG for short.
No!
Expected goals basically gives a probability of a shot ending up in a goal, running on a scale between 0 and 1. Hearts vs Aberdeen saw the home side generate an XG of 1.39. Aberdeen had 1.01. Aberdeen created 0.66 against Celtic versus the visitors' 1.46. 1.28 XG would be created against Falkirk, however the visitors created 2.16. Aberdeen would create 1.53 against Livingston versus their 0.8. Away to Dundee United saw the home side create 1.73 whilst Aberdeen created 1.44. Motherwell saw 1.26 for the home side with Aberdeen 1.1. If we are to average all of this out, Aberdeen's average XG is 1.17 per game, which, whilst not great, is still higher than Livingston and Dundee. Meanwhile, for XG against, they had Tigers St Mirren at 1.47, which gives them the tied 6th best defence. What this means is that, through the underlying stats, Aberdeen should be about 8th or 9th, not rooted to the bottom of the league, but obviously this is all on paper and football is played on grass. Or artificial grass if you're Falkirk, Kelly or Livingston. So how do Aberdeen fix this? Well, evidently chance creation isn't an issue, and I would normally be saying about how they just need a striker that can actually finish. But in this case, I think the problem lies with Felen. Aberdeen in 2025 have won 4 and drawn 5 of their 20 games, scoring 14 and conceding 32, having the worst defence and worst attack of the 10 teams who have played across both the seasons. Even relegated Ross County have more wins and the same amount of goals in 7 less games. In the event of Felen leaving, it makes those opening 3 months of last season in the same territory of Hearts in 2005-06. A massive what if. Aberdeen were the last team to defeat the Old Firm when it came to winning a top flight title, all the way back in 1985. Last season gave them hope that they could return to those days, and whilst a Scottish Cup is still a fantastic achievement, the goodwill from that day in Glasgow has well and truly disappeared. Shows how quickly football can change.
What the fuck is this?
That's all for this video, and of course I hope you enjoyed, even if you are an Aberdeen fan. How do you see the rest of the season going for the Dons? Can it be turned around by Felen or whoever they decide to replace him with? Or will they be facing a scrap to avoid falling out of the top flight for the first time? Let us know in the comments below. Of course, channel memberships are available, and those who have signed up have their names on screen now. Liking, sharing and subscribing are all appreciated, along with hype points. Again, I don't know why YouTube added them, but here we are. They're also appreciated, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.